Hello everyone, welcome back to Tea and Lit. In today's video, we are going to be discussing this month's book, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. So grab yourselves a cuppa and a copy and let's get into it. So I quite liked this book. It had several annotations, if you can see all of my beautiful colors. I quite liked it a lot. I gave it 4 stars, but we'll be talking about that a little bit later. Let's get into our summary first. The Picture of Dorian Gray, as described from what I saw, was that a young man who is very handsome sells his soul to the devil, and basically the picture that was painted of him in his youth will age while he never does. And I don't know if that's like the best description of the plot in my personal opinion. There is a young man and he becomes very, very vain. A friend of his paints a picture of him and he does wish that the picture would age instead of him. But it's not just that the picture ages because of time, it's also aging because of the conflict that he gets involved in. So it's very much like it's a representation of his inner soul, and the sins that he's committed are projected onto the painting. You know how we talk about how like when you go through something difficult you get lines, or when you're stressed you get gray hairs? The idea is the painting is aging when he doesn't. So at the end of the book he's actually not very old, but the painting looks super, super old. And that is because he has lived quite the colorful, one would say, hedonistic and sinful life. So I thought that was something that is not exactly described around quite as true as I think it reads. Anyway, hopefully that made sense. So our main character, of course, is Dorian Gray, and it's told in a third person narrative, so it's not like we're in Dorian's head. And when we first meet him, he's in his early 20s, he's a young man, and he is being painted by his friend Basil Hallward, I think. Hallward. And he's a great painter, but he's a good painter, but he's not a great painter. And Basil meets Dorian and basically kind of sort of falls in love with him, and he becomes his muse for all of his art. And he feels like the way we have like before Christ and after the birth of Christ, there will be a before Dorian and an after Dorian, and all of his art now is credited to the majestic beauty of Dorian Gray. And so that's where our story starts out. Basil has a really good friend from Oxford. His name is Lord Henry Wotton. I thought it was Wooton. No, Wotton. I was saying Wooton literally the whole time. It's Wotton. 2 T's, not 2 O's. So Lord Henry Wotton is Basil's friend from college. And Lord Henry is a bad influence on his friends. He encourages people to make bad choices all the time, and Dorian is no different. So Basil happens to be having tea or something with Henry, and then he professes his love for Dorian during this time, and then Basil becomes obsessed and wants to meet Dorian. And so Dorian is hanging out in the studio, Basil brings Henry along, and Henry and Dorian meet, and it's so interesting to see how Henry gets into Dorian's head and how Basil has such an effect. But Basil did say, like, he's a very bad influence on his friends, don't believe anything he says, don't listen to him, don't go along with the things he does. And it's kind of cool to see how the different characters react, mostly to Henry. I just thought it was cool. Let me just share. So Dorian is young and impressionable, obviously. These are slightly older men who have come and said, you know, Basil says how beautiful he is and how inspiring he is and how special he is, and kind of gives him a big head. And then Henry comes in and says, well, it won't be forever. Like, you will not always be beautiful. You will not always be handsome. People won't always love you. And so the masterpiece of Basil's work is this portrait of Dorian Gray. And Dorian has this meltdown saying, well, I wish that all of my aging would be done in the painting and that I would stay young forever. And in that wish, he gets what he wants, and the story tells kind of what happens after that and how he comes to realize that he's not aging and the choices that he's made that would have aged a mere mortal, but for him it doesn't, and how the choices he's made, how he reacts to them, and how the other people around him react to them. So I think it is a very, very, very interesting read. So that's kind of the summary. We are working with people of the higher echelons of Victorian society. We're not playing with peasants here for the most part. Basil is obviously an artist, and Lord Henry is a lord, but Dorian is also like a lord's grandson or something. So they come from money, and it's happening obviously in the same time that Sense and Sensibility is supposed to be happening, where like the rich people don't really have jobs. But they talk about philanthropy in this book, because to me, that's what you do. If you don't have a job, you should be doing, something nice for society. If you're just rich because your family is rich, you should be having flower shows to raise money for the environment or something. I don't know. But they do talk about that in here. There are a lot of like parties and a whole lot of like not doing anything, but I actually liked this book better than I liked Sense and Sensibility. And I think it might actually just be because of like the nature of the story, not so much the time period. Anyway, that I think is all I want to say about the summary of the book. So let's do my rating and then we'll talk a few spoilers, okay? So my rating, for the quality of writing, I gave it a 5. Again, I just love the way Victorians commanded the English language. Oscar Wilde wrote this beautifully and phenomenally. What time is it? I still have 10 minutes. Beautifully and phenomenally, and I found it to be such a well-structured book in terms of how the language was used. But that's just the nature of the time. I've said this in the past. I loved Sherlock Holmes for the same reason. I just wish that we all spoke the way the Victorians did. Next up is the ease of reading. It's not hard to read, but there are lots of references to things that if you are not classically educated, you may not know. I had to Google a lot of them. He talks a lot about like ancient Rome and ancient Greece, and Shakespeare is brought up, and like lots of references to things that I had to Google. So it's not super, super easy to read, but it's not super hard either. The pacing, I gave a 3. So the first half of the book, I really loved. Ooh, I just whacked myself. The first half of the book, I really loved. And then when Dorian realizes what's happening with the painting, it's kind of like this weird, I just didn't like it as much. I didn't like how this story developed from that point. It seemed like it was a little too fast or something. I don't know. I just didn't care for it. And then the ending felt like I wanted more. It felt rushed. And so that kind of bummed me out. I felt like you could have made it so much more dramatic. And I don't know why Oscar Wilde didn't make it more dramatic, but it did bum me out that it wasn't, more. That's the same reason for the plot development. Like the first half of the book was super great to see how all of this is kind of unfolding, but then the second half was a little less wonderful. It's because you get to the point where like he makes a bad choice and then he realizes that the painting is changing, and it's basically at that point where he's like, should I just be terrible or should I try to be good? And then you see what direction he takes, and it's like, well, obviously. I just didn't love it. The characters, I gave a 5. I did love how the characters interacted with each other, and more specifically, how Dorian started to replicate the behaviors of Henry. I thought that was so cool to see. You see, like, even the language, the way Henry is said to speak and his thought process, you see how Dorian starts to adopt them. You see how at first Basil says that he basically loves Dorian, and when Henry meets Dorian, he says that he wants to dominate him. Dominate is the word he uses. Henry wants to dominate Dorian. And then at the end, you see Dorian, towards the end, you see Dorian using similar language about wanting to dominate other people, which I thought was really cool. Atmosphere is a 5. It's Victorian London. They do spend some time out in the Victorian countryside, but I just absolutely love kind of the grunge feel of Victorian England, like London and Victoria in the Victorian era, and then juxtapose that to like the green beauty of the countryside. I just absolutely loved it. Loved the atmosphere here. The enjoyability I gave a 3, and the reason that I didn't enjoy it was for all of the reasons I said. That first half was great. If it was just the first half, it would get at least a 4, if not a 5. But, you know, that second half wasn't as wonderful. Insightfulness I gave a 4. I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned about what sin does to us and about how our choices impact, you know, the stuff that we can't see, our insides. How when we hurt somebody, it may not show up on our outsides, but like it does change the way we interact with the world from the inside, if that makes any sense. So I really liked it. A logic I gave a 5. It really worked. The only thing was like you don't really get the explanation of how it worked, which is not terrible. I think that it is perfectly fine for literature to have some mysteries, but there's that. And then the book cover I gave it 2. So this is my book cover, and if you see, he's got brown hair. In the story, it says his hair is gold and wavy. This looks brown and straight. So clearly, the designers of this book cover did not read the book, because it says a few times that he's got golden hair with curls. So I was very disappointed that he didn't look like this. So yes, in total, that is a 4 out of 5 stars for The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. The thing that I found most amazing was that I did do some reading on Oscar Wilde, and seeing how this book felt very much a reflection of his life, his feelings. And he talks in the book about Basil's interaction with Dorian. He says that he doesn't want the pictures shown because he feels like he put so much of himself into the work, and how the artist pours their heart and soul into their work. And I've talked about that in the past. I did a why you should read your authors before you read your books. I did talk about that in there, how every good piece of art has a little piece of the artist in it, and a good study of the artwork will reveal a lot about the artist. And this book totally shares that. After seeing, you know, the latent homosexual feelings from Basil to Dorian, you kind of get that vibe in this book, and then it's reflected in Oscar Wilde's life. So I will be doing after this, but it'll probably be, I don't know when it'll be before. I don't know. At some point, the Oscar Wilde spotlight video will be available, and you can really see how he put a lot of himself and kind of his own torments into this book. So I really loved this, and I cannot recommend this book enough to you guys. Please do check it out. There were so many amazing, amazing, amazing quotes. I actually didn't pick one because I loved it so much. Let me see if I can find one really fast, because I do have to move along. We've got a discussion video with my brother. There's a great preface in this book, so be sure you read that. The morality of art consists in the perfect use of the imperfect medium. Let me see. The thing that he ends the preface with, all art is quite useless, which I found fascinating as somebody who was clearly obsessed with art. Intellect in itself is a mode of exaggeration and destroys the harmony of one's face. If they know nothing of victory, they are the least spared the knowledge of defeat. Every portrait that is painted with feeling is a portrait of the artist, not of the sitter. If you could sum up this whole book and the life of Oscar Wilde, it's probably in that quote. Every portrait that is painted with feeling is a portrait of the artist and not of the sitter. In the same way, every book that is written is a portrait of the author and not so much the commentary on the characters. So I really, 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 really love this book. There are some t-shirts and swag down below, so you guys can check out some of these great quotes. If you want to get them on a laptop case or on a mug or something like that, you are welcome to do so. In the comments below, let me know if you've read this book or if you are going to be adding it to your TBR now, because I really hope you do. And also, click subscribe if you'd like to see more literature discussions. And I will catch you guys next time. Bye!